Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the source for rigorous, targeted analysis of material you need to understand quickly and thoroughly.
Glad to be back.
So today we are really jumping into some pretty dense prophetic literature, a space that's, well, it's full of symbolism, and I think it gets glossed over a lot.
It really does. It can feel intimidating.
We're going to be looking very, very closely at just one chapter, Zechariah chapter 5.
And it's a fantastic choice for a deep dive. Zechariah 5 contains the 6th and 7th visions in a series of 8 that were given to the prophet.
And these aren't just minor details, are they?
No, not at all. They are core images that illustrate God's mechanism for purification and judgment. This is all happening as the people are returning to the Holy Land after the Babylonian exile.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit.
Right.
Our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward.
Right.
We're going to try and extract the essential sort of structural knowledge from your source materials about these two really powerful prophetic visions. We want to understand not just what Zechariah saw, but why he saw it.
And what it all implies.
Exactly. What it implies about, the nature of divine judgment and moral cleansing.
Well, the foundational context here is just vital. You have the people back in Jerusalem, and they're enthusiastically rebuilding the temple.
Which sounds great on the surface.
It is, but God's message is that, well, simply rebuilding the physical stones isn't enough. Not if the moral ground underneath is still, rotten.
So restoration demands purification.
It has to. And chapter 5 introduces 2 visions that detail this cleansing mechanism. One deals with pervasive individual sin, and the other one deals with systemic corporate wickedness.
So we're moving from the broad curse of the law, which is visualized as the flying roll, to this surgical removal of systemic corruption, symbolized by the woman in the ephah.
It's a progression, a very logical progression of judgment.
Okay, let's jump right into the sheer spectacle of the 6th vision, because the scale of it is just terrifying. So the vision kicks off with Zechariah taking action in verse 1. It says, "Then I turned and lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a flying roll."
It's a divine interruption, something that just appears and demands attention.
And this roll, it's obviously a scroll, right? A volume that suggests something written, formal.
Non-negotiable.
Yeah, a legal decree.
That sense of formality is so key. The scroll isn't just some abstract threat. It's codified judgment. And the angel who's with Zechariah, he immediately calls attention to its massive physical presence.
He wants to make sure the prophet gets it.
He wants to make sure the prophet, and by extension, all the returned exiles, cannot mistake the seriousness of this message.
And this brings us to, I think, the most crucial detail, right? In verse 2, the dimensions.
The dimensions, yes.
Zechariah observes, "I see a flying roll. The length thereof is 20 cubits, and the breadth 10 cubits. So for us, what does that actually mean in modern terms?
Well, a cubit is roughly 18 inches, so you're looking at something that is approximately 30 feet long.
30 feet?
And 15 feet wide.
That is just, it's enormous. You can't ignore that.
The scale is the message. Why does this divine decree have to be the size of a billboard flying through the air?
It's about being unavoidable.
Exactly. It screams universality and inescapability. You simply cannot hide from something that vast. The scroll is physically dominating the landscape, a written declaration of law that covers every part of the territory God is trying to purify.
Now, the sources highlight something else about those specific dimensions. The 20 cubits by 10 cubits.
Yes, and this is where it gets really profound.
It's not a random size.
Not at all. That is the exact measurement of the holy place within the tabernacle.
Oh, wow.
And later in the temple structure itself.
So there's a direct parallel.
That parallel is where the insight really deepens. See, this isn't just a randomly large scroll. By mirroring the dimensions of that sacred space, the place where God's presence was manifested, the scroll is, well, it's imbued with the same sanctity and authority as the divine sanctuary itself.
It suggests the law and the judgment in that scroll
are as holy and authoritative as the covenant that was housed in the temple. It's divine, sacred judgment being applied directly to the moral landscape.
So the physical structure of the law reflects the physical structure of God's dwelling place. That makes the judgment feel incredibly personal and sovereign.
It does. And verse 3 confirms the roll's function. It says, "This is the curse that goeth forth over the face of the whole earth."
The whole earth.
That phrase, "over the face of the whole earth," it immediately expands the scope beyond just Jerusalem.
So this isn't just a local problem.
No. It underscores that God's moral law is not just a localized covenant for Israel. It's a universal principle of righteousness.
And the commentaries describe it.
Matthew Henry's commentary paints this really vivid picture. It describes this role as containing the righteous wrath of God against sinners, and it's hanging over the guilty world as a thick cloud.
A pervasive, inescapable spiritual reality.
Exactly.
But if the law is universal, then why does this flying roll, this huge document of judgment, focus on only 2 specific crimes?
That's a great question.
It doesn't list all 10 commandments. It specifically targets, in verses 3 and 4, stealing and false swearing.
This specific focus is, I think, very strategic, especially for the post-exilic world they're in. The scroll, you see, it's written on both sides.
Signifying it's comprehensive.
Comprehensive, yes, with one side addressing each of those 2 sins.
And these 2 particular sins, they seem like they would be fundamentally destructive to the whole project of rebuilding society.
Precisely. You have stealing, the text says, everyone that stealeth shall be cut off as on this side, and that's the horizontal covenant breach.
Between people?
Between people, it just shatters the economic integrity and the trust that you have to rebuild a functional community. I mean, if people are stealing from each other while they're trying to rebuild the temple treasury, the whole effort is just doomed from the start.
And then there's the second sin, false swearing. Everyone that sweareth shall be cut off as on that side. And it specifically mentions swearing falsely by my name in verse 4.
And that's the vertical covenant breach.
With God.
That's the defilement of God's honor. False swearing, whether it's in a court of law or in business contracts, it contaminates worship, it contaminates leadership. It basically asserts that God is either blind or just irrelevant to human affairs.
So in a society that's supposed to be restoring the true worship of God, profaning his name is, it's a foundational betrayal.
It is. God is showing them, you must be true to your neighbor, so no stealing, and you must be true to your God, so no false oaths. These 2 things, they fundamentally undermine the vertical and the horizontal relationships that are essential for a restored kingdom.
That structural dualism brings us to the mechanism of the judgment, which is, it's far from abstract. It's intensely physical and destructive.
Very physical.
God says, I will bring it forth, saith the Lord of hosts. This isn't passive, it's an active, initiated judgment.
And the curse actively shall enter into the house of the thief and the false swearer.
So it's about the structure. The consequences of this sin are structural.
Yes. The post-exilic community placed enormous importance on the family unit, the house, as the foundation of society. To threaten the house is to threaten lineage, identity, security, everything.
And the destruction is described as total. It says, the curse shall consume it with the timber thereof and the stones thereof. I think we need to pause on that detail.
We do.
Because it's not just a fine, it's not a prison sentence, it's annihilation. Annihilation of the foundation.
It is total structural ruin. In the ancient Near East, building a house represented permanence. It was about generational stability. The timber and the stones are the physical, material evidence of a life that you've built.
And when the curse consumes both,
it means that the stability you derive from ill-gotten gains, the wealth you acquired through theft, or the reputation you built on false oath, it's all completely liquidated. The judgment is designed not just to punish the individual, but to systematically destroy the structure of that wicked life, ensuring nothing remains to pass down.
It's a self-consuming judgment then. The sin, which was used to acquire materials or reputation, literally feeds the destruction of those very materials and that reputation.
It's an unavoidable, permanent liquidation of a moral debt. The curse doesn't just visit and leave. It abides in the house until the structure is reduced to rubble. And that inevitability, it sets a very, very serious tone for the moral expectations placed on this restored community.
That terrifying image of total ruin. It leads us perfectly into a necessary conceptual deep dive.
Right.
To really grasp the severity of the flying roll sentence, we have to understand exactly what kind of moral failing God is addressing here. And the source material gives us these critical distinctions between 3 terms that I think we often use interchangeably: transgression, sin, and iniquity.
This clarification is absolutely crucial because the flying roll is addressing moral failure on multiple levels, from specific actions right down to the inner disposition. If you miss these nuances, the judgment can seem, well, disproportionately harsh.
Okay, so let's start with transgression. This is defined as crossing a known boundary. It comes from a Hebrew root meaning to step over or trespass.
Think of it as a willful, deliberate violation. If the law is clearly posted, say, do not steal, transgression is looking right at that sign and choosing to step over the fence anyway.
So it implies intentional disregard.
For an established known rule, yes. When King David acknowledges his transgressions in Psalm 51, he's admitting his deliberate act of stepping over God's clear ethical boundary.
Okay, so that's transgression. Next, we have the most common term, sin. And this is defined as missing the mark, to miss the target.
Sin, or cheha in Hebrew, is fundamentally about failure. It's about falling short of God's perfect standard. If the target is absolute moral perfection, then any failure of accuracy, whether you meant to or not, is sin.
Like in Romans 3:23.
Exactly. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. It's a measure of our human inability to consistently achieve that divine perfection.
And finally, we get to the concept that really deepens the judgment in Zechariah 5, iniquity. This is defined as twisted or perverted behavior. It reflects a moral distortion or corruption, the inner bent or warped nature.
This is the internal predisposition. If sin is missing the target and transgression is stepping over the line, iniquity is the condition of having a broken inner compass that guarantees you will miss the mark and step over the line.
It's the source of the problem.
It's the underlying spiritual and moral depravity that produces acts like stealing and false swearing. Isaiah 53 talks about this depth. We have turned everyone to his own way, carrying our own iniquity.
So when we connect this all back to the flying roll consuming the house, the judgment makes so much more sense.
It does.
It's not just punishing the sin, the missed mark of honesty, or the transgression, the deliberate theft. It is consuming the structural fruits of the iniquity, the inherently warped character that made the person build their life on deception in the first place.
Exactly. The judgment is structural because the moral failure is structural. It's a cleansing of the entire moral environment. The flying roll isn't content to just address the symptom. It addresses the underlying disease, which demands the collapse of the structure that was built on that diseased foundation.
Now that severity, this idea of inescapable, complete structural ruin, it forces us into a critical reflection, doesn't it? The ethics of judgment.
It has to.
And the sources introduce a crucial caution here.
This is a necessary pause for introspection, I think. When we see a vision of cosmic, unavoidable judgment, our first instinct might be to apply it immediately to those we disagree with.
To our enemy.
To our enemies. But the source material provides a strong warning against celebrating or, wishing for this kind of ruin on others.
The rule cited is that universal ethical standard. With what judgment you judge, you will be judged. We are explicitly cautioned against saying, aha, or finding satisfaction when those we oppose are harmed or fall under God's judgment.
The theological weight of this moment is that we should always desire mercy and repentance for our enemies, not justice.
That's a high bar.
It is. If the flying roll shows us the certainty of God's judgment against wicked acts, this ethical check reminds us of the spirit required of us. We have to pray that the wicked do not die in their sins, rather than wishing for their immediate destruction. It maintains a balance between acknowledging divine righteousness and upholding human compassion.
It's a paradox, isn't it? The vision shows judgment is total and devastating, yet we are taught that our reaction must be one of longing for salvation.
It is, and the clearest example of this tension is the story of James and John, the sons of thunder.
Right, in the New Testament.
They were rejected by a Samaritan village, and their instant solution was rooted in this very flying roll concept. They said, "Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?"
They wanted to deploy instant prophetic judgment on those who rejected their mission.
And Christ's rebuke just encapsulates the entire morality check. You know not what manner of spirit you are of. The Spirit of God is patience, long-suffering, salvation.
So what you're saying is,
while God reserves the right to execute the consuming judgment we see in Zechariah 5, our spiritual mandate is to reflect his compassion and wait for repentance. We have to separate the observation of a divine principle, that judgment is real and destructive, from our own very dangerous desire to inflict that judgment. And that deepens the text significantly because it demands self-reflection from the reader.
that self-reflection on the ethics of judgment perfectly sets the stage for the next vision, because we move from the judgment of individual specific sins to the actual removal of corporate institutionalized wickedness from the land. The pace of the vision shifts dramatically here. The angel moves Zechariah immediately on in verse 5. He says, "Lift up now thine eyes, and see what is this that goeth forth."
The cleansing process is ongoing. It requires a second distinct action.
And the target now is systemic.
It's systemic. The object Zechariah sees in verse 6 is identified as an ephah.
Which is what, exactly?
It's a large, defined measuring vessel. It was used for dry goods, typically grain, and it held about 5 to 10 gallons.
Okay, so why is the choice of a measuring basket so significant? Why not a box or a jar or something else?
Because the ephah is inherently tied to commerce, trade, and standards of measurement. In Old Testament ethics, cheating using false weights and measures was a consistent, condemned sin.
Ah, so the symbol itself points to the problem.
It does. By placing the focus on the ephah, the vision immediately points to corrupt economic practices and faulty religious standards within the land. If the flying roll dealt with a specific act of theft, the ephah deals with the systematic corruption of the marketplace and the standard of honesty itself.
So this is the institutional sin that they brought back with them from Babylon.
It seems so. And inside this vessel of corrupt trade, we find the personification of that corruption.
This is such a strange image.
It is. Verse 7 details this shocking visual. A heavy talent of lead, which is being used as lid, is lifted, and underneath is revealed a woman sitting inside the ephah.
A truly unsettling piece of imagery. The woman is trapped, or maybe contained, within this system of corrupt trade.
And the angel gives the definitive identity in verse 8. He removes all ambiguity.
What does he say?
This is wickedness.
Wow, not a wickedness, but the wickedness.
Yes, she is the personification, the physical embodiment of all the moral corruption, the idolatry, the national iniquity that the returned exiles have allowed to creep back into their community. She represents the collective spiritual filth that jeopardizes the purification of the land.
And just as suddenly as she's revealed, she's sealed back up.
Immediately, the angel casts the lead weight back onto the mouth of the ephah, and the weight is described as a talent of lead, which signifies immense weight and value. A talent was a large unit of weight, maybe around 75 pounds or even more.
So that's a serious lead.
The lead weight is highly symbolic. Lead is dense, it's heavy, it's immutable. It represents the complete and total sealing, restraint, and containment of this systemic iniquity. God's judgment here is decisive.
So the wickedness is shut in, immobilized.
And rendered harmless within the immediate sphere of the Holy Land. It's not destroyed yet, but its ability to contaminate the community is utterly stopped by this heavy divine lid.
So the goal isn't destruction at this point. It's isolation and removal.
Exactly.
And this leads to the striking visual in verses 9 through 11, where the mechanism for transportation appears.
Zechariah observes 2 women, and the wind was in their wings. For they had wings like the wings of a stork.
The wind in their wings.
It emphasizes the supernatural speed and power that's required for this task. These are clearly divine or supernatural agents tasked with this transport.
Okay, the symbolism of the stork wings. Let's look closer at that. Why a stork? The sources suggest a dual connection migration, but also their potential unclean status.
Right.
Doesn't that make the agents of purification themselves symbolically unclean?
That ambiguity is fascinating, and I think it speaks to the nature of this execution. In Levitical law, the stork was classified as an unclean bird, which often symbolized separation from God's standards of purity.
So that's one side.
Yes. But, on the other hand, storks are also renowned for 2 things. Their powerful wings that enable long-distance, high-altitude migration, and their tendency to nest high up on rooftops.
So they're perfect for the job of long-distance flight.
Perfect. But if they are unclean, it might suggest a divine principle that judgment or the removal of corruption may be carried out by specialized agents that are conceptually separate from the purity they are restoring.
That's interesting.
That's the most consistent interpretation. They are the efficient, powerful carriers needed to transport this heavy burden, the wickedness over great distances, separating it entirely from the land of Israel,
And they lift the ephah between the earth and the heaven.
which signifies a complete and decisive separation from the terrestrial plane of God's people. The wickedness is officially expelled.
So Zechariah asks the inevitable logical question in verse 10. Whither do these bear the ephah?
You have to ask.
If you are going to remove all the organized corruption from a place, you need a safe and final destination for it.
And the angel's answer in verse 11 is the linchpin of the entire vision. It links Zechariah's immediate post-exilic world to the ancient past and the prophetic future. He says the ephah is carried to build it an house in the land of Shinar. It will be established and set there upon her own base.
Shinar. That destination is just. It's so rich with historical and prophetic weight. Let's dedicate some significant time to this destination. Why Shinar? Why is that chosen as the house of wickedness? It feels intensely specific.
It is. Shinar is ancient Babylon.
Okay.
It is the geographic and symbolic antithesis of Jerusalem. If Jerusalem is the city of God's election and the center of true worship, Shinar is the perennial center of organized human rebellion against divine authority.
So the choice is intentional.
Very intentional. It illustrates that wickedness is being returned to its spiritual home.
We have to trace that lineage back. The sources highlight the Genesis 11 connection, don't they?
Absolutely. The Genesis 11 narrative places the construction of the Tower of Babel precisely in the land of Shinar. That event is the biblical prototype for humanity's organized, united rebellion against God's command to fill the earth. It was an act of human hubris.
Trying to reach heaven on their own terms.
On their own terms, yes. To establish their own security and achieve fame without God. So Shinar symbolizes the root and the origin of corporate human pride and anti-God ideology.
So the woman, who personifies the iniquity and moral distortion that plagued Israel, is literally being sent back to the source.
Back to the cradle of rebellion. God isn't just throwing it out, he is systematically relocating it to where it belongs.
This action signifies the externalization of sin.
It does. God cleanses Israel by making the wickedness external, placing it geographically and symbolically outside the purified community. And the phrasing in verse 11 is so key. It is carried to build it in-house and set there upon her own base.
That implies wickedness is not merely dumped there, it's being enthroned. It's given a proper dwelling, a permanent base of operation.
It suggests that organized rebellion and spiritual corruption will establish a formal, stable center, a kind of counter-kingdom in Babylon, in Shinar. It's given a pedestal to reign from.
And for Zechariah's audience.
For them, this was profoundly comforting. Your local corruption is being collected and shipped out to the spiritual center of your recent captors. It also ensures that when judgment eventually comes to that established center, it will be complete and final.
That relocation acts as a powerful prophetic foreshadowing for future events, doesn't it?
It does. The vision is clearly interpreted as setting the stage for commercial and religious corruption being fully judged and isolated before the Messianic kingdom can achieve its final, purified state.
And this is where we see the magnificent consistency of the prophetic vision throughout Scripture.
Absolutely. The Zechariah vision is inextricably linked to the apocalyptic landscape of the New Testament, specifically the Revelations 17:18 connection.
So we're talking about the final judgment on the global system called Babylon the Great.
Exactly. Revelation describes the fall of Babylon the Great under two distinct lights. First, as a massive commercial center, the source of earthly luxuries and corrupt trade.
Mirroring the ephah, the symbol of commerce.
Precisely. And second, as a spiritual entity, the mother of harlots.
Which perfectly mirrors the woman, the personification of wickedness and idolatry.
It's the same pattern. Zechariah shows the blueprint. God takes the systemic corruption, the woman in the ephah seals it, and relocates it to its spiritual throne in Babylon. Revelation shows the execution. That enthroned system, having reached its peak of power and corruption, is finally and definitively destroyed.
The consistency is striking.
It is. The principles laid out in Zechariah 5, that systemic corruption must be contained, isolated, and externalized to its place of origin, are the very principles that govern the end-time judgment on the global political and spiritual system in Revelation. It assures the listener that God has a specific, systematic plan for dealing with all forms of sin, whether they're individual or corporate.
So let's pull back and synthesize the overarching theme of Zechariah's visions and how chapter 5 works within that whole series.
Well, the earlier visions in Zechariah showed great optimism.
Right, about restoration.
God would restore Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, protect the people. But they didn't really address the mechanism of internal purification. Chapter 5 answers that question. How can a holy God dwell among a people who still commit theft, lie under oath, and engage in corrupt commerce?
It's the active, aggressive mechanism of purification. It's not just a passive renewal of spirit.
No, the flying roll acts as the immediate structural judgment, dealing with the remnants of past individual sins, the theft and false swearing that undermine integrity, by destroying the very foundations built on them.
And then the second vision.
The woman in the ephah vision shows the deliberate, systematic removal of corporate pervasive sin and moral corruption, isolating it entirely from the future pure community.
So the takeaway for the original audience was profoundly practical.
It was. The exile happened because of these sins. If you fall back into them, the judgment, the flying roll, is already prepared. But be encouraged, because the institutional root of that wickedness, the woman in the ephah, is being actively removed and established far, far away.
It provides profound assurance.
It does. Assurance that God is fully capable of protecting the sanctity of his chosen place by actively dealing with all forms of sin, from the immediate violation of a neighbor's trust to the highest forms of religious and commercial corruption. Both individual accountability and systemic expulsion are non-negotiable prerequisites for the establishment of genuine purity. Hashtag tag tag outro.
This deep dive into Zechariah chapter 5 has been an intense exploration of divine architecture, the architecture of judgment and purification.
It really has. We've seen the sheer, unavoidable scale of God's law in that 30 by 15-foot flying roll, consuming the very timber and stones of the house built on dishonesty and false oaths.
A judgment that attacks the structure of a wicked life.
Yes. And then we analyze the deliberate, systematic approach of dealing with corporate wickedness, personified as the woman in the ephah, sealed under that heavy talent of lead and shipped by swift, specialized agents to the spiritual center of rebellion, Shinar, or Babylon.
The final relevance here, I think, is the detailed clarity of God's plan for restoration.
I agree. True purity requires both specific individual accountability for specific actions and the deliberate, systematic removal and externalization of institutionalized moral corruption. You can't skip either step if a genuine, holy community is to be established.
It forces us to ask tough questions about how we define stability. If the judgment of the flying roll targets the structural elements, the timber and stones of the house built on false dealing and dishonesty, what structural elements in our own lives today might be prone to that same structural consumption?
That's the question. If our careers, our personal financial security, or even the systems we rely on in our society are predicated on deceit, false swearing in business or politics, or illicit acquisition stealing or fraud, then Zechariah 5 provides a powerful warning.
It's a warning that the consequence isn't just a temporary fine.
No. It's a systematic ruin that liquidates the entire foundation. It shows us that structural integrity relies fundamentally on moral integrity.
That's a profound thought to take away. The moral foundations you build today determine the structural ruin of tomorrow. Thank you for joining us on this rigorous deep dive into the mechanics of prophecy.
Keep seeking that depth, and we'll keep unpacking the complexity. Until next time.